Hello everyone, my name is Waffle and welcome to the 12th episode of Strats Explained, Magically Easy, a video series where I explain how and why different strats and glitches that speedrunners use work. Today we are going to be working as detectives and we will try to solve a mystery death in the alleyway near Luigi's club. This problem has been known for many years, but to this day nobody knows what exactly is going on. Luckily it happens in the very first mission only, so even if you face it you don't really lose anything. The first thing I needed was a consistent way of reproducing the issue. I got some help from a top GTA speedrunner, Guywiz. He told me what to do and after a few attempts I managed to trigger the glitch. Here's what you need to do. During Luigi's Girls cutscene start holding 3 keys: W, D and the sprint key. For me it's the left shift, so basically sprinting diagonally to the right. Pressing the sprint key will also skip the cutscene. Keep holding all 3 keys and after the cutscene, Claude dies. Interestingly, if you try to run to the left, nothing happens, Claude survives. So who is the killer? 8-Ball? Mickey? Or Luigi himself? The only existing theory is that our character somehow mega jumps. As a reminder, to mega jump you need to be moving, punch, jump and play a replay. This is one of the most common ways. These jumps can actually deal tens or even hundreds of thousands points of damage. I already have an episode where I thoroughly explain how this glitch works. If you are curious, you can find the link in the card on the screen or in the description. But something doesn't add up in this theory. We do not jump and we surely don't use any replays. They're disabled during cutscenes and fades. Welcome to my detective investigation. The very first thing I did was checking the bug in RE3. This is a reverse engineering project of the game, and to my surprise it wasn't present there. Okay, but maybe it was fixed? Nick007J suggested to disable all of the fixes. This would bring the project as close as possible to the original game, but this didn't help either. I noticed that developers suggest disabling fixes only on release builds. Prior to that I was using the debug one. The difference between these two is that on release builds, compiler performs extra optimizations. This A makes programs faster and B makes them harder to debug. And magic, the glitch is back, even after I turned all of the fixes back on. My first thought was, oh, is that an optimization issue? That's quite rare, but still happens sometimes. Nick007J once showed that in GTA Vice City one function is compiled without optimizations. Because with them the bike always ends up upside down when you get on it. But that's a topic for another episode. If you're interested, let me know in the comments and I'll talk about this one too. Let's go back to our mystery. A little spoiler for you. My theory about this being an optimization bug was wrong. Okay, but where can we start? First of all, we know that we take damage, and quite a lot of damage, more than 100 health points. And I know that the function that is responsible for dealing damage is called inflict damage. So the very first thing I did, I searched for every single usage of this function, and there are quite a few, but most of them are useless. Let's see, weapon type flamethrower. Well, we know that we don't take any damage from fires. If I scroll further, we'll see weapon type fall. That sounds interesting, but what is even more interesting than that is the usage of speed squared variable. What's that? Okay, there we are. Speed squared is calculated right here. We use mvec move speed, so a vector that contains our move speed along each axis, and we take that value, calculate its magnitude and even square it. So sounds like this can be quite big. But what exactly is that mvec move speed? How do we calculate it? Well, shift plus F12 and ooh, that's quite a lot of references. Finally they all loaded, and yeah, I spent quite a while checking all of this and looking for something interesting, for something that we can use, and I finally found it right here. Velocity change. Okay, what is velocity change and where are we in general? First of all, we are in cpad update position, so seems like we are on the right track because, well, update position is a function that is responsible for updating our position in the world. What is this velocity change? To calculate it, we use our mvec move speed that we just saw and another vector, mmoved. Alright, what is mmoved? That's another vector, and shift plus F12 shows that there are not so many references, which is nice, because we end up right here in the function called cpad calculate new velocity. And here's how we calculate mmoved. For each axis we calculate some cross product first and dot product, and we use the same two vectors. mvec_animMoveDelta, so something from animations, and forward. Forward is calculated right here, and it's just a unit vector. We take some angle and we basically get sine and cosine. That's it. That's a unit vector. It cannot be broken. So we can guess that maybe something is broken in animations and we get some abnormal values. But honestly, I didn't want to go into animations because that's painful. So I decided to check what's further. And further we have a condition. If cTimer getTimeStep returns more than 0.01, then we take our current mMoved values that we calculated right here and we multiply it by 1 divided by getTimeStep. So if getTimeStep returns 2, we basically divide our mMoved by 2. But if getTimeStep returns a value that is smaller than 1, for example this 0.01, then we basically multiply our mMoved by a reciprocal, so by 100, and that sounds like this can be quite a lot. So I hope that this was the place where something goes wrong, and I decided to check what does getTimeStep return. And it returns ms_f_timestep. What's that? Shift plus F12. And we end up in this function called cTimerUpdate. We should be familiar with this function because we've seen it in one of the previous episodes, but anyway, ms_f_timestep is calculated using frame time divided by 1000 multiplied by 50. What is frame time? It's right here, it's update in cycles scaled divided by n cycles per milliseconds. What's that? Well, Shift plus F12, and we end up in the function called cTimerInitialize. So when we initialize the timer, and that obviously happens only once, we calculate something and we don't change this value at all. So we can conclude that this is a constant value, meaning that we cannot manipulate it, it cannot be broken. Cool. We go back and we check what is update in cycles scaled. It's right here, it's update in cycles multiplied by ms_f times scale. Okay, what's that? Shift plus F12. We end up in the same function, cTimerInitialize, so seems like that's another constant. Well, technically it isn't, I checked it a little more, and if you take a pill or use a cheat code to speed up the game or maybe slow down the game, then this value changes. But in a normal gameplay, we can say that that's a constant, so this value doesn't change either. Okay, what's update in cycles then? That's a difference between PC and old perf counter. And PC is calculated using query performance counter. Okay, that's quite a lot. What does all of that mean? Let's try to find out. We will start with the official documentation by Microsoft. Here is the query performance counter function that we just saw. The description says that this function retrieves the current value of the performance counter, which is a high resolution, less than 1 microsecond, timestamp that can be used for time interval measurements. One more interesting thing from here is down there, minimum supported client is Windows 2000, so this function has been around for quite some time. Back to the code, and now it's a little bit easier. We have our old timestamp, we get a new timestamp, and we calculate the difference between the two. This way we get an interval, a duration between two calls of the current function, of cTimerUpdate. Then using this duration, we calculate the rest of the values, including ms_f_timestep that we're interested in. Okay, so now the question is, how often is this cTimerUpdate function supposed to be called? Well, as we can see, this function also calculates frame time, which means that it is safe to assume that this cTimerUpdate function has to be called exactly once per frame, so we can calculate frame time correctly. We know that if we play with frame limiter on, our game runs in 30 FPS, so frame time should be 1000 milliseconds divided by 30. Let's put it right here, and our final ms_f_timestep should be 50/30 or 1.6 in period. And indeed, if we launch the game and find f_timestep on cheat engine, we'll see that the value is 1.666 and then there are some inaccuracies. So far everything seems to be correct. Hold on, 1.6 isn't very useful. We hoped for something less than 1. Maybe there is something that calls this update function too? To answer this question, we press Shift plus F12, as you probably guessed by now, and look, there are so many calls, many more than one. Some of them are even in scripts, let's see. Set cutscene head anim. cTimer stop, set head anim, cTimer update. Okay. Load all models now. cTimer stop, load all requested models, cTimer update. Load scene, cTimer stop, load scene, cTimer update. And well, we can check cutscene manager, for example. cTimer stop, do something, cTimer update. Do you see the pattern? What is going on? Well, it's actually very easy to guess. Developers had an idea, a great idea. Some of the operations, for example loading something, can take quite a lot of time, so it would be logical to remove that time from the in-game timer, to make the in-game timer loadless if you want. But the execution is very weird. First of all, stop doesn't do anything meaningful on PC. I must say that on PS2 it actually stops the console timer, but it does not address the real issue, and the real issue is we are calling cTimer update. So there are some frames where this cTimer update function is called twice, meaning that the duration between the two calls is smaller than it should be. During one of my tests I managed to capture changed value. F-time step was 0.04. So right here, instead of dividing by 1.6, we actually multiply by 25, and the moved ends up being 40 times bigger than it is supposed to be. And then going through the chains that we traversed in reverse order, we calculate the rest of the values. Our speed becomes way too big, and we take a lot of damage because of that. For those who are curious how much exactly, in this particular example it's more than 20k. So, mystery solved? Not really, we still don't know what exactly triggered that second update call. Let's check the mission script. This is the place where the cutscene ends, and as we can see there's load scene, one of the commands that is broken, one of the commands that is affected by the bug. But down there we'll see that we get controls overclock only here, set player control, player on, meaning that we should not be able to move right here. And let's check when the game removes the control from us. And as you can see that happens before the cutscene, when 8-Ball says here's Luigi's Club, blah blah blah. Okay, let's continue. Here is set player control. When we disable the controls, we get here and we execute make player safe true. If the argument is true, we get into the first branch and execute a lot of stuff. But we are interested in this line, set disable player controls, player control, player info. Actually, there are many different types of controls, and you can move your character only and only if all of the types are enabled. So we already lost player info, but actually when the cutscene starts, we also lose player control cutscene. How? Well, there is a command called load cutscene and it calls load cutscene data. And right here, in the very end of this function, we'll see set disable player controls, player control, cutscene. So now we need to enable two different types in order to be able to move again. And with the cutscene it's very easy. When the cutscene ends, it calls clear cutscene, delete cutscene data, and here we'll see set enable player controls, player control, cutscene. But that still doesn't answer the question. Why can we control our character? What does enable player control, player info? But recognize this function, make player safe, but this time with argument false. It's right here, the next line. Okay, let's see what happens. If the argument is false, we get into the second branch and look, set enable player controls, player control, player info. So it turns out that clear cutscene command, not only does it return the cutscene controls, it also returns player info controls, meaning that we get both of the types that we needed enabled. Meaning that we can finally move again, even before than we were supposed to. We can assume that in early stages of development, developers thought, okay, we're gonna manipulate the controls manually, just like we see it in the first missions. But then they quickly realized that it's gonna be much more convenient if they introduce a new type, cutscene type, and tie it to the cutscenes. But this is just my guess. Let's see how we can fix this bug. Actually, developers themselves found this issue, and they introduced a proper pair of functions, suspend and resume, presumably during Vice City development cycle, and this pair made its way into the PC version of GTA 3, but it is not present on PS2. So all we have to do is swap stop with suspend and update with resume, if I can spell it. And if you're curious how these two work, well, let's see. It's very simple. When we call suspend, we get the current value of the counter through query performance counter, the function that we checked earlier. Then when we call resume, we get the new value of the counter and find the duration. So the duration of something, maybe loading some models or whatever. And we add this duration to the performance counter that we use to calculate the frame time. So when the update function is finally called, the game doesn't notice this loading interval, because we already accounted for it here, and we get the correct frame time. We solved the mystery, we found the issue and even fixed it. I could end the video right here, but I had more questions. Why do we die when we are running to the right but not to the left? Why don't we die in other Luigi's missions even though their mission script is very similar? Can we die somewhere else? I decided to continue my investigation, and trust me, I wasted countless hours on some of this. I'll start by addressing the second question. Why do we die in Luigi's Girls but don't die in any other Luigi's mission? On the left we have the Luigi's Girls part, and on the right we have Drive Misty for Me. The rest of the Luigi's missions look kind of similar to this one on the right. If we look at the highlighted commands, we'll see that they are all the same, but the order is different. Here on the left, we get our controls after clear cutscene, and then we have a half a second wait allowing us to start moving, to start running and do something. And only after that we have load scene where the bug happens. On the right, however, we similarly get the controls after clear cutscene, but basically at the same time load scene is executed, meaning that the bug happens before we are even able to start moving. Only after that we have that half a second delay that allows us to go anywhere. But it's too late already, the bug already happened, so we don't die here. As you can see, the order is very important. But why? Why do we die only if we're running to the right? That question took me a lot of time to answer. I was debugging, I was jumping from a breakpoint to a breakpoint. I even had to implement this mini system that allows Claude to auto-move in the direction I need. I know, it's nothing fancy, but that's still extra effort. So let me quickly show you what I managed to find out. We go back to the function that inflicts damage, and if I scroll to the very top, we'll see two very important flags, is standing and was standing. On the very first frame, when we get the controls back, is standing is true. So we get into this branch and we say is standing is now false, was standing now becomes true. Next we calculate collisions, and if we are running to the right, on the very first frame, we do not get any collisions below torso. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure why. But this condition is false, meaning that we don't execute anything that's inside, including inflict damage, so we don't get damaged on the very first frame. We go onto the second frame, and before we enter this function again, some other function changes was standing to false. I'm not gonna show it to you, but I hope you believe me. This time is standing is still false, so we don't execute anything that's inside, and we go to calculating collisions again. On the second frame, we get a collision below torso. Now this condition is true, and we execute everything that's inside. We go down there, and if was standing is false, and it is false, we inflict damage, and that's how we are getting killed. But what happens if we are running to the left? Let's go back to the beginning. On the very first frame, when we get the controls back, is standing is true, so now it becomes false, and was standing becomes true. Okay, we calculate collisions, and if we're running to the left on the very first frame, we already get a collision below torso. So this condition is true, and we execute everything that's inside. We go down here, is was standing false? No, it's true, so we do not inflict damage. But we set is standing to true. Some other function changes was standing to false. We go back here, and on the second frame, is standing true? Yes, it is, so we once again execute these two lines. Then we calculate collisions, we once again have a collision below torso, so we once again go here, is was standing false? No, it's true, we set it standing to true, and that goes on and on and on until we lose all of our speed. So we do not take any damage. Now, as I said, I'm not sure how this all works. Collisions are calculated using some smart math, and I'll be honest, I was too lazy to figure it out. It felt way too specific for the video anyway. I'm gonna guess that it has to do with the shapes of the surfaces we're colliding with, so with ground, with walls and everything. And it just so happens that the stars align, and if we are running to the right, on the very first frame we don't get any collisions below torso, but we get at least one on the second frame. And with the way the code is written and the fact that we have broken speed, we die because of that. That's the best explanation I can give you right now, and I hope that's gonna be enough for you. But are there any other places where we can die? Turns out that most of the broken commands are used during cutscenes, when we cannot move, so we cannot die there. But there are some exceptions, and one of them is Terminator. When you finish the mission, doesn't matter if you failed or pass it, the cleanup code gets executed, and inside there is a load scene command, and we know that it is broken. I decided to test it. I started the mission, set the van on fire and started sprinting everywhere, in hopes that when the mission fails, I will get launched and die. But after a few attempts, nothing happened, and I started doubting everything I just told you. What if I got it wrong and it's something completely different? I needed a definitive answer. To get it, I changed the game script and made it execute a broken command every quarter of a second, so basically all the time. The results were in: I couldn't get away from the safe house. Getting away from hospital proved to be hard too. Quickly I realized you don't have to sprint, you don't even have to move fast at all, you can die from a little step. My theory about surfaces and their shapes looked more and more promising. I had to watch my step in order to get to the ambulance. Then I decided to drive around the city, and boy oh boy, it was fun. Pedestrians were flying left and right, sometimes dying, sometimes surviving, and that was the moment I remembered the ending of the episode about mega jumps. What we've covered today was only the tip of the iceberg. I was told that there are a lot of methods that don't require playing a replay at all. What's even weirder is that in some of them mega jump happens with some other pedestrian, not even our player. And to this day these anomalies haven't been explained. Look at this one for example. Do you know what happened? I don't think so. I do. RC missions have load scene in their cleanup code too, just like Terminator. So I went back to clean, unmodified game and finally died in Terminator, repeated Kamix's bug, and even got the flying pedestrian in Tony's mission. And it occurred to me, almost every cutscene has a broken command, and even though we cannot move, pedestrians can. So they are jumping, we just don't see it, and even if they die, we don't really pay attention to their corpses on the streets. I think it's time to sum it all up. The mysterious death happens because developers use the wrong function. This leads to frame time being calculated incorrectly. The value we get is times smaller than it should be. This value is used to calculate our moving speed, and because of that the game thinks that we are moving way too fast. And when we collide with something, we take damage, sometimes too much damage. But even with all of that, the death in the alleyway is extremely rare. We were not supposed to control Claude here in the first place. We got that half a second to start moving. And I guess the shape of the surface was just right, so we got very lucky, or unlucky, depends on how you see it. Even in other places where you can get that bug and you can move freely, it's not that easy to die. I should also mention that the correct functions are present in the PC version of GTA 3, but they are not used that much. Interestingly enough, Vice City and San Andreas both have this issue too. Developers fixed it in some places, but not everywhere for some reason. But I couldn't find any mysterious deaths here. It seems like Vice City changed how pedestrians move and how animations work, and even if your speed is too high, you don't get launched anywhere. Although it can be something else, don't quote me on this one, all I'm saying is the issue is still here. At this point I had only one, small but still unanswered question: why did it not work in RE3 the first time I tried it? And the answer turned out to be very simple. My PC is roughly 6 years old, and without optimizations the game wasn't running fast enough. And then I thought, what about the original game, but on older PCs? I managed to find a few people with different computers from early 2000s. Thank you everyone who tried to help. And I was right, even if you press all of the correct buttons, you don't die. So, it turns out that neither developers nor testers could face this bug. Alright, today our detective agency managed to solve the mysterious death in the alleyway near Luigi's Club. And we actually solved many more interesting mysteries along the way. But this is not the end. I'm sure the GTAs are still hiding a lot of dirty secrets. The challenge today will require you to think, explain to me, what is the load scene command for? Of course you can check the source code, but that's not necessary. All you need is its name and the places where it's used. I'll give you a little hint. Out of everything that we saw today, I think it's gonna be the easiest to think about the RC missions. And this is it for today. A poll for the next topic is already live. Click the link from the pinned comment and vote for the option you like the most. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and if you don't want to miss the next episode, consider subscribing. My name is Wofel, see you some other time.